Hello. I'd like to tell you about a first day at work embarrassing story. And to bring you up to date on how this happened, I had completed 4 years in the military, and I came out in 1960. And I had a good friend who worked in commercial radio, and he is the person who started me on my career as a radio announcer. He had received a job at a television station. I had never worked in radio before, and he wanted to know if I wanted a job, and I said sure. So they just hired me right off the street to start working in radio, and I was completely green. But as I progressed, I got to the point to where I could do country programs, top 40 programs, and of course able to say some of the tongue twisters like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, and there were some other things coming across the news that we would have to pronounce. And I'll tell you a little funny story. When Lou Alcindor changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, we had a radio announcer that he did the sports in the morning, and he would never look over his news before he read the news. And that's a dangerous thing to do unless you're really good at it. So he picked up the news, sports news, and he was reading, and he said, "Today it was announced that Lou Alcindor has changed his name to Cram Abel Jabal." And that was one of the funniest things. I mean, everybody was in the floor. And of course, he was in a soundproof room, and he couldn't hear us laughing at him. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a funny thing about me. A couple of years later, I had spent 2 years in the reserve, and I got married, and I re-enlisted into the Air Force, and I was stationed at Oxnard Air Force Base in California. Well, being, having a new wife, I needed some extra money, so I thought, well, I'll go apply for a radio job. And there was an FM station in Oxnard, so I went down there and walked in, and I could tell the way the guy was looking at me. He wasn't looking for a country disc jockey, but I told him I put on my radio voice, And so he said, well, do this commercial and read this newscast for an audition, which I did, and he hired me on the spot. So anyway, the way the shifts would change, usually the disc jockey that you relieved would usually do the news, and then he would have a record queued up, and he would start the record, and you would come in and sit down and start your shift. And of course, you would tell the listening audience who the artist was and everything like that. So I had just gotten the job. It was my first day at work, and the guy I relieved did the news, and he started the record, and I could tell that it was a Frank Sinatra tune. And so as the record ended, I put on my radio voice and I said, "That was Frank Sinatra with Begin to Begun." Station manager, he put his head in the door and he said, "What'd you call that?" I said, "Oh, Begin the Begin." And but he must have liked me because I stayed there and worked part-time the whole time I was stationed at that base in Oxnard, California. But that's some funny things that happened in radio. We had this one guy, he was so good at reading the news, but they would take a cigarette lighter and catch his news on fire, and he would be knocking it out and reading. And he was so good that he never did miss a word when he was reading the news, and I always envied those kind of people. because when I had a newscast coming up, especially if there was somebody in the news like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, I wanted to make sure that I could pronounce it correctly. Well, that's just a little funny about Begin the Begun, or is it? That was Frank Sinatra with Begin the Begun.